in motion. If you're not a regular of the program, we multi-stream across Facebook and Periscope and, of course, YouTube. YouTube is really our home base. That's where all the live chat takes place. So if you're not subscribed on over there, now's a good time to go do that. And it looks like we are online across the board. So hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona, over at the R&R Law Group, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of good people facing criminal charges navigate through the criminal justice system and kind of get their lives back on track a little bit. We all have bumps in the road. We all have little, moments in our lives when we're down. And so our team helps them through that process. And over the course of those years in practice, we've seen a lot of problems with the justice system, not just the criminal justice system, just the justice system in general. And what we want to do is hold them accountable. We want to make sure that we as citizens are demanding the best from those who set and enforce the rules. And so we have seen, we're seeing a lot of this around the country today, a lot of misconduct involving the police. We've got problems with prosecutors. We've got judicial malfeasance, and we've got political misconduct and political malfeasance and political nonsense all across the board, which has been the subject of the show for quite some time now. And we're still going to be diving into it today because really, what else is there? The federal elections, the presidency of the United States, that is the chief executive. That's where most of the federal enforcement, the power emanates from the presidency. And so right now, when the country is sort of in this position where a lot of the mainstream news sources are saying it's a very clear, cut and dry, open and closed case, we're not even allowed to talk about it. Joe Biden is the next president. There's a big contingent of the country that believes that. And there's a large segment of people who also sort of disagree with that. They have a lot of questions about what took place in the various states as these elections were unfolding, because the election night, it was looking like it was a Trump victory that was right around the corner. And then by the next morning, there were all these, numbers that showed up in the middle of the night around 4 a.m. that kind of modified the expected results. And so they have a lot of this concern about the legitimacy of the election. And so what we're doing on this program is what we call mental gymnastics, where we're just going through, we're analyzing some of the claims with a key focus on a lot of the lawsuits so we can have a better understanding of how this is really working, because it's hard to get a good analysis kind of anywhere else in the news, in the newspapers. Everybody seems to have a bias these days, and I'm not claiming that I don't, but we are going to look at some of the primary sources, some direct evidence, and we'll do some analysis on that. Now, if you are not a regular of the channel, would love it if you hit the subscribe. We go live every day at this time, and as I go through the program, please feel free to engage in the chat. We have a super chat that just came in, and I want to just acknowledge it. It's from James Clark. He's on the road right now, and we're going to answer his question and all of the other super chat questions at the end of the program. So if you're sending those in, feel free to do that. Miss Faith is right back there in the room behind me, and she is going to be screen capping those and passing those along so that we do not miss them. And so today what we're going to be talking about is a lot more lawsuits. It's some lawsuits, some letters that have been filed from the GOP party in different states. But I want to go through and start with Pennsylvania. We're going to do some analysis on what's going on there. We've got a new statement from the Secretary of State. Her name is Catherine Boockvar. She's been the subject of a lot of the different lawsuits that are flying around in Pennsylvania. We've talked about her and some of the lawsuits against her specifically, and today she released a statement. So we're going to detail what that may mean for the Trump campaign, for the Biden campaign, and the pending lawsuits. The NAACP, they joined the fray. We talked yesterday about how the ACLU is a big player now. They're going to be supporting the Biden side of this argument, and the NAACP is also getting involved now. We have the audit we talked about this week in Georgia was supposed to be an audit, a recanvass, a recount, everything. Remember, the Secretary of State in Georgia came out and said he was going to do all those things. Well, now, a couple days later, it looks like a lot of the instruction, the training manuals, and the actual practicality of how this is all going to take place is not looking so much like an audit. So we're going to break down what some of the GOP concerns are over that process, because you would imagine an audit, the point of it is to verify a bunch of stuff. And if you're not going to be verifying it, then what's the point of doing it? Or if you're going to be doing it, don't call it an audit, because that seems to be a little bit misleading. Then we're going to transition over to Arizona, because there's some interesting stuff going on here as well. Trump lost a lawsuit, or actually had a lawsuit that was dismissed in Arizona. So there's a lot of headlines about that. Trump, got beat up. He filed a claim that really didn't have much merit to it, went into court, got embarrassed. And that's kind of true a little bit, but is that really that big of a deal? We're going to talk about that because there's another new lawsuit that's coming out in Arizona that is illustrative of how these lawsuits work. It's going to be kind of driving a wedge in between an issue, and so we want to analyze that and bring you up to speed. And then, of course, live chat at the very end of the program where we pause, take some time, and answer your questions. So before we get into it, let's follow along the bouncing ball, the smiley face. This is the election day calendar. So on the 3rd, we had the original election. Now we are about 4 weeks and 3 days away from the actual Elector's Day, which is the day that the states have to certify and their electors will go and cast their electoral votes. As a recap, the vote balance here, this is something that we have spoken a lot about, that Donald Trump, in order for his campaign to be successful, he's got to keep an eye on these numbers in these different states. In Arizona, he's still down 11,000. We're basically close to being done counting here. These were yesterday's numbers. So he was actually at a deficit of 284,000 votes yesterday, and that increased to 290,000. So kind of going the wrong direction. Now in Arizona, he was at 11,000 yesterday, and he's changed that by about 400 votes. The rest of the votes mostly stayed the same. You can see here in Pennsylvania, the margin increased for Joe Biden and went up by about 10,000 votes, about 8,000 votes there. Nevada tightened up a little bit by about 1,000 votes, but otherwise it is more or less the same. So it looks like a total of about 6,000 vote differential that happened between yesterday and today. So it's actually going the wrong direction for the Trump campaign, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. What we were speaking about this entire week was about putting voters and different ballots into different buckets. And the Trump campaign's legal strategy thus far has been to make claims that would disqualify big buckets of votes. And so they're trying to identify where those are. And so the fact that we're not seeing any actual buckets get thrown out yet is not unexpected. These lawsuits are all still very new. We're not even 2 weeks out from the election. So a lot of these lawsuits are preliminary, and we're going to illustrate that as we go through and specifically talk about some of the Arizona lawsuits. So as I mentioned, one of my concerns for if I was going to be advocating for the Democrats and for the people who want Joe Biden to be in office, my thought was, well, the Republicans are really, really marshaling a lot of resources right now. There's all these people across the internet who are sleuthing the data, downloading, purchasing data. I've seen, claims that people are buying county data from some data providers at, $25,000 a clip and stuff. And you've got all of these, little kind of factions just springing into action and consolidating their resources. And it's a lot. It's a lot of material. It's a lot of information and claims. And, people are doing really interesting analyses and all sorts of stuff. But we didn't hear much from the Democrats. We heard the topical stuff. We heard a lot of just accept it. This is just over. They'll have a professor from some, college who's not really doing much of anything other than providing commentary saying there's no precedent for this. It's unlikely that, but they're not really kind of getting in there and grinding and doing the work, which I thought was to their detriment. If the Republicans are claiming there's a bunch of fraud going on, why are the Democrats not making those same claims and going and filing lawsuits in the states that they lost by small margins in order to go and see if they can flip some states that they lost and actually increase Joe Biden's lead? I was wondering where the heck are they? Why aren't they doing that? And lo and behold, this week we saw some more people come into the fray, not necessarily the grassroots type of involvement that you see from the right, but you are seeing a lot of bigger entities getting involved. Specifically, we talked yesterday about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and they are joining the NAACP, which is another huge organization they're kind of joining forces, and they filed a motion to intervene in the Kathy Boockvar case in Pennsylvania. So this is the lawsuit that was knocking on the Supreme Court's door. This is all just, the other parties are now trying to join that original lawsuit. So Donald Trump's team joined that. This was originally filed by the Democrats in a lower level court, and all these different parties are jumping into it. And so here we have the NAACP. This is their memorandum. So it's a memorandum in support of a motion to intervene by non-parties. So you can see here the NAACP, the Pennsylvania State Conference, a Black Political Empowerment Project, Common Cause of Pennsylvania, League of Women Voters. All these different organizations are now trying to join this lawsuit. So we're seeing all of these different factions now from the Democrats bubbling up, right? Women Voters of Pennsylvania and a number of different names. We got the Black Political Empowerment Project, the NAACP itself. So, big organizations and a lot of these little factions are coming together and joining this, which is going to lend a lot of resources, a lot of lawyers, a lot of money, a lot of fundraising to join against the Donald Trump campaign. And I want to show you what some of their claims, well, we're not going to even see what their claims look like because it's too premature. The lawsuit or this motion is actually about 20 pages long. I want to show you the table of contents so you can get an idea of what it looks like, but there's really not much in there about what their claims are going to be. So let me just show you this so you can practically understand how this all works. So you see here, there's some factual background, and what they're saying that they want to do is undo the efforts of Pennsylvania to ensure that the mail-in ballots are ultimately counted. So they want to make sure that all of the mail-in stuff was counted. Now, a lot of these claims are going to be 100% or 180 degrees opposed to whatever Donald Trump's campaign was claiming, which is basically that the mail-in ballots shouldn't be counted, that the election date shouldn't be moved, and all that type of stuff. They're also saying that the applicants are organizations that promote the interest of voters. So they're representing voters, which of course they are, and they have particularized interests. So they're making key claims that these lower, these sort of grassroots groups are consolidating into one big entity and then making the claim, but they all have individual particularized interests. Then the rest of this stuff is pretty basic. Basically they're making the argument as to why they should be allowed to join this lawsuit. It's done on time. They have interest in this litigation. If this case is resolved, it's going to impact the people who they're representing, and so on. And so once they actually get permission to join the lawsuit, then they're going to be a party to it, and they're going to be able to submit responsive pleadings, and they're going to be able to get involved and make additional claims. And so you can see here, we talked about this last week. Donald Trump and all these people were filing lawsuits, and everybody was up in arms about this. Oh my gosh, he's trying to overturn the election. As I said, this is just how lawyers communicate. This is just the ordinary course of business. And so these lawsuits will naturally start small, and some may be dismissed and some may not. And, it's like a little seed that will then blossom as more and more issues come into play, more witnesses, more affidavits, more experts, more people get involved. In this case, the Democrats are bringing in some additional resources to support their side as the claims continue to mature. So that's that lawsuit in it of itself. Now, we've got some other little, curious things happening out of Pennsylvania, and then we're going to go in and we're going to see what Ms. Boockvar actually has to propose when it comes to a potential recount in the state of Pennsylvania. So we have a representative from Florida by the name of Matt Gaetz. You may know this guy. Somebody who has a pretty big media profile, pretty articulate. I think he was in the House Judiciary Committee, or he was questioning somebody. I think it was some of the tech people when they were in front of the House. I can't remember, but he's usually in front of the cameras. He's pretty good at it, pretty articulate. And he has a post that he put out today indicating that there seem to be some interesting things going on in Pennsylvania. And here's what he has to say. So he posted this earlier today at about 11 a.m. He said the 90-plus crowd in Pennsylvania showed one hell of a voter registration surge during a pandemic. This is a data-driven, circumstantial evidence of ballot laundering. The U.S. attorneys in Pennsylvania should be talking to these, quote, new voters to see if they intended to cast ballots or if the ballots were voted without consent. So he's showing a graph down here that says it's the registration of 90-plus-year-olds in Pennsylvania. You go from 2000, what is this? It looks like down there at the bottom, 1 year to this year, and then we see this massive just jump up in new voter registration for 90-year-old people, like not even in the ballpark of past years. And, you could make some interesting arguments there. You could say that, yeah, these 90-year-olds were being taken advantage of. There's been other headlines around the country where I think somebody in Texas, I saw a headline that I mentioned yesterday, that she was charged with 134 counts or some number to that effect for collecting ballots in a nursing home and then mailing them out and trying to turn them in. She ended up getting caught. But, that's clear voter fraud. And the question I think that Matt Gaetz has is that happening? Is somebody taking advantage of the elderly, helping them register, collecting their ballots, and going and voting? And if they were, that would have to be happening on a massive scale in order to impact the election in Pennsylvania. So even though it's an interesting number, it's not particularly evidence that there was fraud going on. The alternative explanation is just as plausible, that Yeah, it's a pandemic. Yeah, I mean, these people are senior citizens. They're, of course, not going to go to the polls during a pandemic. They're all going to want to vote by mail. And so registration would necessarily be higher just to compensate for the market demand. This isn't anything that's rooted in any malfeasance or misconduct. This is just old people who don't want to go out because old people tend to die from COVID. Right? It's not rocket science. And so, you can, these types of graphs, they look curious. You look at it and you say, okay, one thing is not like the other here. This bar graph is really high and the others aren't so high. So necessarily, if you're looking for fraud, you're going to look at a graph like that and say, yeah, that's fraudulent, right? It looks bad. But I think there's some other good explanations for it. Now, again, to sort of refute the argument, the next question that I would have would be who got all of these 90-year-old people registered and how did they do it? I think that's the next logical progression there. If you have a bunch of 90-year-olds and you're just sort of rounding them up and taking them down to register, or I don't know if you can register online in Pennsylvania or how that works, but are they on their own going and doing this, or is somebody else helping them through it and then interfering or sort of breaking that chain of custody where they're actually taking their ballots and voting for them? There's no evidence there from this graph. But maybe maybe that's why somebody who is an elected official in our federal government is talking about it, because maybe he's got some additional evidence to support that there was some sort of collusion or some sort of interference in that regard. Now, some other things going on out of Pennsylvania that are interesting, I would say. This has not been confirmed, but it looks legitimate enough. It looks like an actual email. This was posted by the DC Playbook, and they say, breaking in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, the Delaware County. The county itself urgently contacts poll workers to inform them that the election results from their precinct cannot be confirmed and approved due to missing data. And so they mentioned some of the missing data down here. This is from at the DC Playbook. And you'll see here that it looks like yesterday on Thursday, November 12th, urgent action required from the minority inspectors, the Delco poll workers. And we have an email here that's been screenshotted. It says, "Dear Delaware County poll worker." And remember, a lot of these people are volunteers and things. "Thank you so much for your service. Unfortunately, due to missing data, election results from your precinct cannot be confirmed and approved for final tabulation until the missing data is reconciled. In order to ensure that all votes cast will be counted, we need at least one member of your team to come to the machine warehouse to complete the forms. If you were a minority inspector and were provided an envelope at the close of polls, please bring that with us. The missing data may be any of the following: missing yellow numbered lists of voters, incorrect numbers in the yellow book, missing ballot reconciliation forms, missing information on the close of night return sheet, missing return sheet." Gives them the address of the warehouse, says show up there. "Kindest regards, Christina Iacono, Delaware County poll worker coordinator." So that's concerning. If that is a legitimate email and that went out to all the poll workers in Delaware County, that could be a pretty significant problem if they were going to do an audit and check things, but it looks like they're not. We're going to get to that in a minute. But think about what we talked a little bit about yesterday when we were talking about open record laws and retention rules for these governments. There are a lot of them. I don't know what they are specifically in Pennsylvania, but I'm presuming that they exist. And this data, if it's truly missing, that's concerning. When we talked about on prior shows, the idea that you need a chain of custody, you need receipts, you need to be able to track one item from point A to point B to point C to point D. If you can't do that, then the conclusion that you get at point D is not so good. It's not so it's difficult to presume that it's credible because anybody along the chain could have manipulated the evidence or manipulated the result. So typically in law, we talk about we want it's called a chain of custody document, and you want to see what the handoff looks like at every step of the pipeline, every stage of the progression. You want to know A gave it to B gave it to C gave it to D, and so on. And if they can't do that because they're missing data, it's going to make it hard to go and audit the election. But doesn't look like they're going to be doing that in Pennsylvania, at least not right now. So we have a statement from the Secretary of State. Her name is Kathy Boockvar, and she is in Pennsylvania. And she released a press release statement today on November 13th that we want to run through and see what she is indicating is going on in her state. Obviously, Pennsylvania is a big deal. If Donald Trump were to flip Pennsylvania and flip one other state, I think that's all he needs at this point in order to change the result of the election. So that's why we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about Pennsylvania and Michigan. So we're back here in Pennsylvania, and here's what Ms. Boockvar had to say. So She says here, we're grateful to all 67 counties who have been working overtime, putting in extraordinary effort, and so on. We continue to adjudicate and count approximately 100,000 provisional ballots that were issued to voters at the polls on Election Day, as well as 28,000 military and overseas ballots that were cast in the election. So as we saw, there's about 128,000 ballots that are outstanding, it looks like, and there are additional provisional ballots that we're going to get to that are about, it looks like 168,000 or so ballots. Donald Trump is down by about 48,000 votes, or maybe 60 now, but it's over that amount. So if you add up all the provisional ballots, all of the military and overseas ballots, and all of the, I think it's about 128,000. It's more, it exceeds the difference there. Now, whether they would split in a way that would support Donald Trump is a different question. But she goes on, she says, under state law, the county boards must individually adjudicate each provisional ballot and assess whether they meet the standards for counting. They do so by verifying the voter. So this is where we're getting into, how they're processing this stuff. They're doing so by verifying the voter was registered to vote in the precinct in which the ballot was cast and that the voter did not cast a mail-in ballot prior to requesting the provisional ballot at the polling place, which makes total sense. You show up at the ballot. They want to make sure you live in that. You show up at the voting place on Election Day. They want to make sure you live in the precinct and that you haven't already voted by mail, because if they sent you a ballot, then you have one at home. Now you have two ballots. So when you go in and they say, no, we mailed you one, so that you're going to fill out a provisional, and then they're going to make sure that you don't have duplicate ballots. All right, so pretty standard election stuff. Higher numbers of provisional ballots were cast this year due to new laws and procedures created to two bipartisan election reform measures. We've talked about this on this channel. Act 77 is the big one that's a focus of a lot of litigation. As of Friday midday, approximately 40,000 of the provisional ballots had been counted or partially counted, and these numbers will continue to climb over the next few days. 28,000 from the overseas and military ballots. But this is all to set the preface basically here saying we will not be ordering a recount and recanvass of the election returns in the counties, as no statewide candidate was defeated by 0.5% or less of the votes cast, including the race of President of the United States and a couple others that are local there. So she's unequivocal here. We're not ordering a recount. We're not ordering a recanvass. We're not doing anything because that margin was too small. Donald Trump, I think right now is at 0.08%. So he's not at that 0.5% or less mark. He's close, but he's not quite there yet. Now, if one of these Supreme Court cases comes down, or another judge basically invalidates a big bucket of votes, it may knock that 0.8% difference between Trump and Biden down under the 0.5%, which is 0.5%, and that would automatically trigger an audit that would take place in Pennsylvania. So it's close, but not quite there yet. She goes on, she says approximately 10,000 ballots that were cast on or before, and this is a big number here, or a big point. Small number, but a big point. Approximately 10,000 mail-in ballots that were cast on or before November 3rd were received by counties between 8 p.m. November 3rd after polls closed and 5 p.m. November 6th. Okay, we spent a lot of time talking about this, and we were trying to figure out from somebody objective, somebody who's has access to the numbers, what that number was. Remember, this whole thing started because they changed the election rules prior to the election. The Democrats did. They filed a lawsuit and they wanted to move the election date, the deadline, back significantly. They filed these lawsuits all across the country. Watch the previous shows if you want a deeper analysis on that. But they did. And there was a lot of litigation over this, and they were trying to find how to extend the deadline. What power does the court have to just change the deadline without the legislature doing it? Because the legislature is responsible for passing the election laws. The Constitution says so. So when the judges do it, that's a big problem, right? That's what the theory was, and I think that's how the Supreme Court's going to hold, but we'll see. But the point is, they moved the election day, and it created this separate bucket. What happens when ballots come in after Election Day? The legislature says they got to be there by 8 p.m., but they moved the deadline, and so they created this separate category of ballots that came in. And this is critical, because if the Supreme Court takes that separate bucket, anything that came in after the election until the new deadline on the 6th, so anything from the 3rd to the 6th, if those got invalidated, the theory was that was a big bucket of votes, but it wasn't. It was 10,000, according to Kathy Boockvar, which is troubling for the Trump campaign. I thought this was kind of one of his biggest potentials to flip the votes in Pennsylvania, because we have to find big buckets somewhere that are in contention. And this one just isn't. It's only 10,000. So even if the Supreme Court comes back and invalidates that deadline extension, they say, no, you shouldn't have moved it, Pennsylvania court. You don't have the authority to do that. Only the legislature can do that. You broke the law. You violated the Constitution. We're going to throw out all the ballots that came in after the election. That is going to be a small number, and it's not going to be enough to flip over Pennsylvania. That's just what it looks like. Now, there are a lot of questions about this, because there were some rulings, and there was, again, some gray area where, they're backdating. There's allegations that they're backdating ballots. And so the claim here that you see from Bookvar that they were cast on or before November 3rd, there's a lot of concern about that. Whether they were actually cast on or before November 3rd and were received by counties by the 8 p.m., right? So if they were, received at 9 p.m., were they counting those as being received on November 3rd, right? There's a lot of this indication, or claims at least, that there were backdating ballots and that many ballots were being accepted without being postmarked. So they can't really tell you, and we talked about this also, about the chain of custody, that if you can't see how many ballots are sort of going through the Postal Service and being received at different times, it makes it difficult to validate when those ballots were actually put in the mail and when they were received, because the numbers don't match up. You can lose things in the mess of all the numbers. So we'll see what happens there. 10,000 votes is not enough in order to flip it, because the margin is significantly bigger than that. Now, it's a pretty big bucket still. There's 10,000 votes, and if they add that bucket to another bucket and another bucket, they may get to the margins that they need. So it goes on. It says the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in September that counties should count ballots received through 5 p.m. Friday, November 6th, if they are postmarked by 8 p.m. on Election Day. They ruled that counties should count those ballots if there is an ineligible or missing postmark. They say they also ruled that counties should count those ballots if there is, unless there is sufficient evidence to demonstrate the ballot was mailed after Election Day. These ballots are not in a sufficient number to impact the no recount determination of any statewide races. So you see, this is where there's concern. The court also ruled that counties should count those ballots if there is an ineligible or missing postmark. And that's what people are concerned about. They're saying that, okay, that's fine. After 8 p.m., we can cut that off and count all of those ballots. But what about the ballots that came in, let's say November 4th, November 5th, with no postmarks on them? They can claim that they were received prior to that, but were they really? There's no real hard evidence of that. And that's what I think people have some doubt over. Now, is the Supreme Court going to do anything with that? We will see. It's knocking at their door, and we'll have some updates on that when they make a final ruling. All right, so let's change gears. That's what's happening in Pennsylvania. Let's go on over to Georgia. This week we talked about the Georgia Secretary of State, who said that they were going to come out and they were going to do an audit and a recanvass and a recount, and we're going to do it all at once. We had the clip of him out there in front of the podium giving his big speech that Americans demand transparency and we want accountability and all this stuff. Well, there's some indication now that maybe the words didn't quite match as well as they should. So this comes from CBS 46. It says the Georgia GOP implores the Secretary of State to revisit audit protocols. Georgia election officials will begin a statewide retallying process of all the votes cast this Friday. They're going to hand count, and they must be done by November 20th. Members of the Georgia GOP and the Trump campaign demanded a recount, and several issues of the auditing process were then laid out by the Georgia GOP. So we have this letter that is from the Georgia GOP. It's somewhat general. Let's take a look at it so you can see what some of the problems are with this audit process. And I had a lot of these questions myself. I didn't know what that looked like. Are they auditing everything? Are they auditing all of the registration rolls, all the people who requested ballots but didn't return them? Are they going to try to figure out what happened to those? How deep and extensive is this thing going to be? Because to me, an audit is very extensive. It's more than just a simple recount. It's a total analysis of the entire integrity of the system. And so when somebody comes out and says that and then turns around and implements some policies or some procedures or some training guidance that is a big departure from that stated policy, that's a little bit of a concern. And the Georgia Republicans are in agreement with that. So here's what they have to say. The Georgia Republican Party and the Donald Trump Party appreciate your announcements. And they said specifically yesterday, you said you would be doing an audit, a recount, and a recanvass all at once. See that down there at the bottom. However, the training and the directives issued today do not comport with your goals, and they do not satisfy our concerns. So now we're writing this letter to say the people of Georgia cannot have the confidence that a hand count and an audit were meaningful and delivered on your objectives if we don't improve the process. We have concerns. These are where they get into, what their actual problems are. They say we have concerns about the meaningful access to the auditing process. So your office announced today that the state parties can designate one reviewer for every 10 audit teams. So they have a 1-to-10 ratio. It makes it impossible for us to hand count decisions to be reviewed in real time. One monitor cannot observe 10 tables at once. Transparency has been a very significant problem during this election. During the initial vote tabulation, some counties placed ballot reviewers in multiple rooms and aggressively enforced arbitrary distancing restrictions that prevented them from observing. In other counties, they were not even allowed an unobstructed view of the process. We have concerns today that you're aggravating these problems. And they are requesting that you, that this individual, the Secretary of State, allow designated monitors on a 1-to-1 ratio. So rather than having one person for 10 teams who's just kind of going around and spot checking the different tables, the campaign saying we want a 1-to-1. We want one person at every table. And I don't know what the problem with that is. I don't know why not. If the campaign wants to do that, if they want to front the personnel to do that and pay them and bring volunteers in and do that, what's the problem with that? Maybe it's a COVID concern. Okay, we can mitigate around all that. But why not more transparency? Why a 1-to-10 ratio? And quite frankly, maybe this Secretary of State turns around and says, sure, yeah, bring 2 people. Yeah, bring 2. If you want, bring 2-to-1. I don't care. Bring them all in. Have everybody take a look at everything. We're going to go through the audit. You cannot interfere with the audit. You cannot slow this thing down. We've got some deadlines. And if you're interfering with the process and we document that and give you a warning and give you some sort of due process before we throw you out, be prepared for that. So if Trump's people come in and they start, what's that one? And they slow down the process so that they can't meet their deadlines, that's a secondary problem. And I think the courts would then rectify that. But they would at least be showing some goodwill. Come on in, take a look at everything. And if they interfere with it, throw them out. So you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. You give them a little bit of leeway until they blow it. Don't preemptively blow it and make this thing seem illegitimate. Have them come in, observe everything, and throw them out if they're not accommodating, if they're not playing by the rules. So, the letter goes on. They've got several issues here. They say, we request that you direct the courts to make certain that the monitors can actually see the process. Simply allowing them somewhere in the vicinity is not enough. It doesn't give them proper or meaningful oversight. And they're also concerned that there was a directive apparently given in Georgia that the different counties must certify their results by 5 p.m. tomorrow, which seems very soon to me to be doing an entire audit. It says, given the audit and the recount will necessarily still be ongoing, it is improper for the counties to be directed to certify the accuracy of the results before the audit and the hand count are completed. The purpose of the audit is to ascertain whether the tabulations were accurate. Only upon completion of the audit can you certify this. Please rescind your earlier directive that the counties are required to certify their results tomorrow. Does that even need to be stated? They're trying to certify the results before the audit is completed? That doesn't make any sense. There's plenty of time to do the audit. We've already discussed about some of these deadlines. So why are they trying to rush to certify the election? What happens if they certify the election and they find out that the audit revealed that there were problems? Are they going to decertify what are they doing? They're trying to make the sandwich, but the bread is not out of the package yet. We got to do things in order to have a logical flow, a logical conclusion to this thing. So the GOP, I think, is 100% right. Why would you certify the election before the audit is completed? Doesn't make any sense. Now, number 5, they're saying that the security of the paper ballots is important. And so they want to see and basically double check some of these concepts which we've spoken about here, the transporting of ballots, documenting of the chain of custody. They really want, make sure that the ballots are secured and they're protected. And then the letter closes out with this, final conclusion. We appreciate your decision to proceed with openness and transparency and all this stuff, protecting the integrity of Georgia's of Georgia's election and so on, signed by somebody from Trump's campaign and the Georgia Republican Party. So those, that is underway. That itself is not a specific lawsuit, but it is sort of a, kind of a precursor to a lawsuit. Typically these letters are sent as negotiation to say, hey, this is what we think is fair. Please make sure this happens. If that doesn't happen, it may lead to a further lawsuit. So we're going to see next in Arizona that the Arizona GOP filed a lawsuit. Donald Trump lost a lawsuit, dismissed a lawsuit, and then there's another lawsuit. So it's like this revolving door. One goes out, one comes in. And a lot of this takes place in the forms of these letters initially to say we have an issue here. And if you don't correct this issue, well, we're going to think that that's a violation of our legal rights. They're going to go refer to the statutes, whatever they look like in Georgia. Then they'll go file a substantive lawsuit and bring their claims in court. So that's what's happening in Georgia. Let's go on over to Arizona before we jump into the super chat, because these lawsuits are just sort of, they're all over the place. And I saw somebody in the comments previously said, it's really hard to keep track of them. And they're right. It is hard. There's so much going on that really what we try to do is focus on some of the issues instead of all the various lawsuits. Maybe a new lawsuit will pop up that will present a new issue that we haven't heard about or discussed before. I don't need to keep covering all of the different lawsuits that are detailing access. We've talked about a lot of those. Donald Trump saying we don't have access to things. We can't watch stuff. That's happening everywhere. But today in Arizona, we have a little bit of a different argument, which is interesting. So we go over to Arizona. The Trump campaign drops an Arizona lawsuit. The case was ultimately dismissed. So here you see here, this comes from Arizona Family. Trump campaigns drops Arizona lawsuit requesting a review of ballots. We talked a lot about this yesterday about the green button and about Sharpie Gate going on here. Lawyers for the Trump campaign have dropped a lawsuit seeking a review of the ballots cast on Election Day after finding that the margin of victory for the contest could not be overcome. They filed a lawsuit on Saturday saying some people were confused on Election Day, that their counts wouldn't be voted and so on. And they dropped it because they know that it's not going to be fruitful. And we went through some of that yesterday where they were saying that basically somebody would go in, they would vote, the ballot machine would reject their ballot, a poll worker would then come over, press a button, tell them, put your ballot back in. They would do that. And what the poll worker, the allegation was doing was invalidating their overvote. And because of the Sharpie issues where the Sharpie's bleeding through the paper, people are thinking that their votes are getting canceled, and they may have checked online and seen that, that it wasn't counted, but it was one of those things that went in front of the judges. They looked at the numbers. There's not enough there. Even if they succeeded on all of those claims, it wouldn't flip the margin. So they actually dropped that lawsuit. Now, just because Trump dropped the lawsuit and quite frankly, my understanding is, as listening to some of the arguments or reading some of the arguments, that it wasn't even a particularly, let's say, admirable claim. Okay, so they went in, and Zulu, who's a regular on this channel, he wanted me to report on some of the transcripts and things. I haven't seen any transcripts, but if you want to send me some transcripts, I will. But his point was, and a lot of people are making these claims, these comments that Trump's team is sort of incompetent, or they're making these legal claims that are really far out there, that are kind of bizarre. And they're saying, well, God, look at these guys. It's like, the C team, not even the B team is in here in court. And I would agree with that. Some of these claims are a little bit of a stretch. They are kind of far out there, and they don't make the case very well that a state should flip. But that's not really the point here. And we're going to get into that in a minute as to why that is. Lawsuits fail all the time. People file and lose lawsuits all the time. It's kind of the point. Sometimes you have to file a lawsuit just to meet a deadline to explore a claim. And once you explore the claim, you find there's no merit to this claim. So you just dismiss the suit. Suits get dismissed thousands of times every single day. It's not the end of the world. Now, there are other lawsuits going on in Arizona, to my point. So Trump lost this lawsuit or dismissed this lawsuit, but there's 3 other ones that are going on in Arizona right now. Here's what they look like. You see that we've got Donald Trump for president versus Katie Hobbs. They've got a court date scheduled for today. It was at 3:30. And I'm not sure what happened there. We'll look into that. We had another one going on. There's next Monday at 10 a.m., which is Lori Aguilera versus Adrian Fontes, who is the Maricopa County recorder, which is where Phoenix is. So it's a big population. So there's a lawsuit there. And then we also have this one, the Arizona Republican Party versus Adrian Fontes, which is what we're going to talk about next. They have a court date on November 16th. And this was the one that was dismissed previously. Or this was a different one that was dismissed. So, not unusual for a lot of lawsuits to be filed, some of the bad ones to be thrown out, some of the sort of lesser claims to be reviewed, analyzed, discussed in open court, and judges kind of laugh you out of the courtroom. It's just what being a lawyer is. You got to have some thick skin if you're going to play this game. So yeah, sometimes you lose, sometimes you win. It's just part of the deal. So that is what's happening in Arizona. Now, I want to tell you about this new lawsuit that was filed by the Arizona GOP by Kelly Ward, who is somebody here, and she's making a different claim than any other that I have seen. And let's see what it looks like. Before we do, and this question is very closely related to James Clark. James Clark sent a question, I think 2 days ago, sent the same question yesterday, and I didn't answer it because the statute was so long and I didn't want to read it, quite frankly, or forgot to read it. But my point is I want to answer this. I wanted to take a little bit more time and actually spend some time answering it because it's exactly pertinent to the same issue that we're talking about that took place in Arizona. So James Clark, he asked yesterday these two questions. He posted them in the super chat and another one this morning, and he's got two interesting points that I want to just highlight for you. So he says, me again, this was yesterday. In Arizona, when a ballot is mailed, is that bypassing the precincts and not subject to the Arizona Revised Statutes rule? And if so, how is it counted? So the question there is, if somebody mails in a ballot, how does it get to the county recorder? How does it go there? Does it bypass the precincts? Because if you go and vote in your local precinct, you just go to your school, to your church, whatever that is, and you just go vote there, right? And you're in your precinct, you're kind of contained in that bubble. But what happens if you mail in your ballot? Where does that go? Does it still count and become part of the precinct? It's an interesting question. So we're going to get there. But he has another question that he sent over. He said, I'm driving right now, but in North Carolina, there was a Board of Elections case that actually involved absentee ballots and it flipped the seat. It was based on the allegations of fraud. And he's asking the question, is this something that maybe we can use to flip the vote, flip the results in some of these locations? So basically using a North Carolina precedent in order to modify some votes. Now, my understanding is that Trump has already won North Carolina. I think that was declared today. But let's dive into these two questions because they present interesting issues. What happens to your ballot when you mail it, right? Where does it go and how is it counted? That's the subject of the GOP's claim here in the state of Arizona. Before we do, let's take a quick look at this North Carolina issue. So in North Carolina, in February 6, 2019, this is in Raleigh, North Carolina, there was a 5-member state board of elections. They were going to be holding an evidentiary hearing later about this issue, claims of irregularities related to absentee by-mail voting and other alleged activities in certain counties in the 9th Congressional District. So they had absentee by-mail voting problems back on February 6th in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hearing was on that date. Notice was sent out, seatings limited, and so on. The background, because of an ongoing investigation, the state board has not certified their results in the contest between a Democrat and a Republican. The former 9-member state board, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 1 unaffiliated, voted 9-0 on November 27th and 7-2 on November 30 to not certify the results as the investigation into the voting irregularities continued. So there are issues. These issues have already popped up, and there's precedent for a lot of them. And it's going to be interesting to see how these new procedures, how these new cases are being handled relative to the old precedent. Is there a departure from the old precedent? Is it being followed the same way? Is it being done at all? In other words, are there situations like this one in North Carolina where 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated person voted 9-0 because there were voting irregularities? Are they going to do that this go round when it's a national election? Are they going to make those same claims, or are they going to reverse course and turn around and say, there's no fraud anywhere? We don't see anything going on, even though there's documented fraud in your state from 2019. Okay. And they all voted at least to continue the investigation. So it's going to be curious to see where a lot of these public officials, how they really, how consistent they've been as this all continues to unfold. I think it's a little bit too soon right now to look back and do any analysis. But when we're out 30 days and we see sort of a consistent pattern, it's going to be very interesting to see where a lot of these people fall. All right, so now let's go back to the original question from James, what about a ballot? So this is kind of abstract concepts, but let's think about this. So if you go and vote and you go to your church and you submit your ballot, you voted in a precinct and it's there and they're going to count it because it's going to be delivered as part of a precinct delivery down to the tabulation center, and they're going to count it. It's going to be organized in there. But what if you just send it directly to mail? How does that work? And Arizona actually set up these interesting things called voting centers, sort of as an overlap in these different precincts. So you see how confusing this can get for all the people crunching the numbers out there in the Trump team. You've got voting centers and you've got precincts and you've got counties and then you've got states and you've got wards and you've got all these different ways that states splice and dice their information. In Arizona, in 2011, we created this concept called a voting center where anybody in the county can just come in and go vote at the voting center. And so this was a letter from Mark Brnovich over to, I think, some people in our legislature. He says, Arizona law has long required each county officer in charge of elections to conduct a post-election hand count audit of a certain percentage, currently at least 2% of ballots cast on election day. In 2011, the Arizona legislature authorized the use of voting centers for voters to cast ballots. It says here, on a specific resolution of the board may authorize the use of voting centers in place of or in addition to designated polling places. Thus, the law provides voting centers can replace or supplement precincts. Okay, so this is where lawyers make their money. We're arguing over words here. We're arguing over voting center versus precinct. And there's kind of a big distinction here. And this is why they filed a lawsuit. So let's dig into it. Kelly Ward is, I think, the chair of the Arizona GOP. And she released this statement. And then we're going to dive into the lawsuit shortly before we jump into the live chat next. The Arizona GOP files a lawsuit. And here they're saying, traditionally, voters have been assigned a polling place. That's their precinct. However, for the 2020 election, Maricopa County set up a number of polling places across the county called vote centers. So just in 2020, isn't that interesting? Where voters from any precinct could vote. There's a fundamental difference between the polling centers and the precincts, most notable being the fact that there were only 175 vote centers, but there were 748 precincts. So a big consolidation. 748 precincts would have had a lot more widespread distribution of the votes. But here, they're consolidating a lot of them down into 175 vote centers. Hand counting by precinct would therefore potentially result in a more precise sampling of the votes. Arizona Republican Party Chairwoman Kelly Ward issued the following statement, and she says here, the question is one of statutory construction, whether the Secretary of State's procedures can supersede Arizona state law. Voters deserve complete assurance, and so on. All right, so let's do a quick recap on this. So Arizona law, after an election, says the county has to do an audit of their results, and they have to go and randomly check 2% per precinct. That's what the law says. That's Kelly Ward's claim. 2% audit on precincts, which is a smaller subset of a county, right? Many, many, many more precincts. 748 precincts over to 175 vote centers. So in Maricopa County, it's a much bigger number. They're saying currently that you don't need to do an audit of the precincts. You only need to do an audit of the voting centers. And what Mark Brnovich is saying is that the voting center is authorized by the election manual, which is authorized to be part of law by Arizona law. So in other words, Arizona law has a provision that grants the election manual some authority to act as legal guidelines. The legal guidelines say you can audit the what are they called? Voting centers. But the actual Arizona law, which is Kelly Ward's argument, is no. The law says specifically precincts. So you can actually do the audit on the 175 voting centers. So you see here how nuanced it is and what the difference is. It's very, very minor, but it's illustrative because it's a difference. Here, what the argument is that the 175 different vote centers are much more consolidated. And so you can be doing an audit of a consolidated number, but it's not representative of the different precincts. So maybe the fraud is actually happening in the precincts, but it's being lost in the centralized tabulation of the audit that's taking place because a huge portion of the votes were being done at these voting centers. So it's sort of more of a distributed audit, and it's looking in other places that might be lost in the big audit. So it's, not the most sexy legal arguments that are happening here. We're arguing over words. But the reason why I think it's interesting is because it's indicative of something that might become a wedge issue or something that opens the door to investigate further. Okay, so let's say, for example, that Adrian Fontes, who is a Democrat, is my understanding, let's say he led hypothetically speaking, he led the charge to consolidate these things into voting centers in 2020. The claim here, I think, is that was done for, some sort of a motive, and it was done to make the audit more centralized, so that the numbers were coming out of those numbers. Kelly Ward is saying that was being done in violation of the law. So here is the actual Superior Court complaint, verified complaint. It was filed literally yesterday, and what they're going to be talking about is the same statute that Mr. Clark actually sent over. So when we go over here, we're going to see that this is the difference. Plaintiffs here is Kelly Ward and the Arizona GOP. They're asking that they're saying the manual that is being used by the Secretary of State is being done in violation of the law. Defendant Adrian Fontes is conducting a sampling of the elections, and the sampling is incorrect. The sampling is not the right sample. He should be sampling smaller precincts, is her argument. Now, we don't have a response yet because this was just filed yesterday, but Mr. Fontes is certainly going to file a response. He is still the county recorder for the Maricopa County, and we're going to see what his argument is. And let's go on with Ms. Ward's lawsuit here. You can see, let me move myself. You can see here it says, for 2020, Arizona, Maricopa County used what's called a vote center model. A voter can vote at any polling place across the country rather than voting at their own precinct. There were 175 voting centers in 2020. Secretary of State manual says you must conduct a hand count of regular ballots from at least 2% of the vote centers. So we have a vote center model. The Secretary of State manual says, 2% of vote centers, but Arizona revised statutes down here, the actual law that is not the manual, requires that 2% of the precincts be sampled. And let me move myself. 2% of the precincts be audited, not the polling places. So in other words, they're using the wrong language. They're doing the wrong thing. They're focused on these voting centers where they should be much more focused on actually auditing the precincts. This is what they're asking for in the lawsuit, and you'll see here it's not super consequential. So we talk about legal issues, and then we talk about the consequentiality of it, whether they're going to change anything or do anything. And this is what Kelly Ward and the Arizona GOP are asking for. They're specifically saying they want the court to declare that the hand count sampling be of the precincts. So when they do the audit, go do the audits in the precincts with the plain language of the statute. Don't go to the voting centers. They want an order making Fontes to perform the count of the precincts, not the centers. They want to get attorney's fees and costs and all of that other stuff. So that's what's happening in Arizona. Now, Mr. Fontes, of course, is going to issue a response. But this got me asking about a question. How are they organizing this stuff? When the votes come in, are they tagging them by precinct? So if anybody went and voted at these voter centers, I'm sure their records are still being organized, or at least are sortable by precincts, right? You'd have to think that would be the case, but we don't know. And so we will when Mr. Fontes actually issues a response. All right, so that's it for the actual content of the program. Let's get that chat box going on so that we can answer some questions. Miss Faith has sent over some nice super chats from a few people. Thank you so much for those. We have Brian Kang, who sent over a super chat saying, cool right back at you, my friend. Thank you so much for that. We have Carolina Flying says, Dick Morris, White House advisor today, posted a video of a Georgia observer that has been kept away from the tables. DickMorris.com, look at his daily videos. Yeah, and that's interesting. We're going to see a lot of that, right? We spent a lot of time yesterday talking about those claims from both Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, where they're saying that most of their arguments are surrounding this observational interference issue, saying we didn't get access to go in there and look and monitor this stuff that was going on. Therefore, all of the votes should be thrown out. Remember, we talked a lot about that. Is that type of harm, does it justify the remedy of excluding that many votes? Just because you didn't see something doesn't mean that it was done fraudulently or done illegally. But then we just reversed that argument. That was kind of the issue in Pennsylvania, but we looked at the Michigan rules and they were so intense, meaning they were valuing the importance of their watchers, of their poll watchers, so significantly that it kind of makes you believe that the legislature, when they passed the law, would have wanted those votes to have been thrown out if they weren't being monitored, because the monitoring is as important as the voting. What if you have a bunch of people cast their votes, but you have people who are tampering with them as they're coming through the tabulation centers? So they're making this protection for the public, saying, if you don't allow this observation, then your penalty is the votes get thrown out. Right? And we see this a lot in law. Sometimes the penalties can be very harsh in order to deter the government from doing bad things. In criminal law, it's called the fruit of the poisonous tree. If, let's say, for example, an officer goes into court and they want to get a warrant to come search your home. So they go into court and they make up a bunch of stuff and they say, this guy, we have text messages and phone calls, and this guy was doing all this illegal stuff. Therefore, Your Honor, we need a warrant. The judge grants them the warrant. They go into your home and they find that you have some illegal stuff in there, right? They find you have illegal drugs, or you've got, something on your computer that you shouldn't have, or whatever it is. If your attorney goes in and challenges the underlying warrant and says that the warrant should be invalidated because it was obtained on false premises. In other words, the officer lied, made up some evidence in order to execute the warrant, then the warrant would be thrown out by the court, and the officer and the government would no longer be able to use the fruit of that poisonous tree. So the seed was planted. It was an unlawful warrant. They can't go in and then use the evidence that they obtained out of your residence against you because it's poisonous. It came from it's fruit of the poisonous tree. And so the remedy there is to exclude all of that evidence. It's to take all of that illegally obtained material that they found from your home and throw it out. And many people will say, well, wait a minute, that person was still doing something illegal. They were still breaking the law. How can you just get rid of that evidence and let that person go free? Even though the officer made up the basis for getting into their residence, they still found some illegalities. And that person was still bad. They should still go to jail because they had all that stuff on their computer, right? Well, the courts say, no, because it's fruit of the poisonous tree. It's a punishment to the officer and to the police department and to the prosecution. They get punished for breaking the law. And so you can imagine a similar type of argument being made by Trump's team when they're going into states like Michigan and saying, we didn't get to observe any of this stuff. And the penalty for that, according to them, is that those votes should not count. And I think that is the claim they're making. That's what Rudy Giuliani said, and that's what Donald Trump has indicated as well. All right. Some other questions coming in. Dan Hill says, Faith and Rob utilized the firm to fill out all of the Biden ballots and are here to seem uninvolved. Faith and Rob utilized the firm to fill out all the Biden ballots and are here to seem uninvolved. I got it. Okay. Yeah, we just have a whole department of people just scribbling away back there, filling in ballots. Hi, Faith and Rob. That's from Dan Hill. Good to see you, Dan. Thanks for being here. We have Trey Contreras who says, is non-zero enough people to observe? Is non-zero enough people to observe? That's from Trey Contreras. I don't think so. But I don't know. We have Aaron Sevi who says, so Robert, with your newfound rock star stats, do you still take on defense cases in Arizona? Of course we do. That's from Aaron. Yeah, we got an awesome team here. I don't know about the premise there. I'm just your humble little defense attorney here, trying to sort through a lot of the madness out there in the world, and grateful for you being here and joining along in the program. But yeah, we're grinding away over here. We got an awesome team of people. We actually just had our November all hands meeting. So we had a nice lunch with the team here in our conference room in Scottsdale, had a nice meeting. We were talking about, we were doing a little exercise on shoe policy. What is the appropriate shoe policy here at the law firm? It's Friday, our sandals cool. I heard a lot of brand names. Miss Faith had some ideas on some brands of shoes that should be allowed and appropriate. So we're going to let them duke it out and figure out what the new shoe policy is going to be here at the R&R Law Group. So another good question. Let's jump on over for some other ones. We have John Drake. What can be done about organizations like the Lincoln Project doxing Trump's legal team and using the scare tactics to make them quit? So I think if people are being malicious and they're doing stuff that is in violation of any laws, or they're getting close to that, I think the appropriate thing to do is report them to law enforcement and to file lawsuits against these people. I think that's probably going to be the only way that they're going to listen. We have another question from True. He says, yeah, if they throw out all those unwitnessed votes, then couldn't the Dems just not go to Republican counties and then have all those votes thrown out under the same premise? Yeah, it's exactly right. So that's why I think that the remedy doesn't meet the harm. Because if the government then goes and says, yes, if you don't get to watch the votes being counted, then they're illegitimate, then why would any candidate anywhere go watch the votes? Because it gives them the argument to say that the entire process was illegitimate. And what about the candidates that can't afford people to go and watch the polls? Right now, is the government taking responsibility for ensuring that you have enough resources to go watch the polls? No, that wouldn't make any sense. Every single person who runs for office, does the government need to hire enough people who are part of your campaign so that you have enough resources to go observe everything? It's not practical. If the campaign, in my mind, the best solution would be if the campaign wants to go observe these things, full access, come take a look. But you got to bring your own people. And you got to document that you didn't have access to certain things. And it needs to be more than I just didn't get to see. It needs to be a volitional act. It needs to be, concrete sort of collusion, that they're actually breaking the law and keeping you out from the meaningful observation of the ballots. But you're right, True. Anything else would be open for a lot of manipulation. Both sides would be claiming that they didn't get to observe. And is the government really going to invalidate hundreds of thousands of votes just because somebody didn't watch them, or somebody who felt they should be there wasn't there? That doesn't make any sense. All right, we have another super chat that just came in from Carolina Flying. She says, voters asked to send postal mail letter to Trump 1600 Pennsylvania Ave, Washington, D.C. 20500. We the people are demanding audits in all 50 states. Yeah, I think you'd probably be better served if you sent those letters to your local representatives. I think they're the ones who are more inclined to be able to do something about that issue. Donald Trump, even though he may get tons of letters, he's not going to be able to go in and order the states to do these recounts, these audits, these recanvasses. Those are state issues. The federal government can't really come in and mandate how states conduct their elections, because the Constitution says that the states do that and the legislatures do that. But it is a good idea. I think people should be demanding a lot of their elected representatives. This is when they come into play. This is when we need them to go and do things and sort this stuff out. Stop passing the buck. Somebody needs to do some hard work and sort it out, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of concerns about this, rightfully or wrongly. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they're dead wrong. If 60, 70 million people have issues with the election, they can be dead wrong about it, and it's still a problem for the other rest of the other portion of the country who wants to govern things accordingly. Joe Biden might get elected, might get put into the White House, but if half the country is in total objection to him, doing anything, that's a problem. Remember all the Donald Trump when he was in office, still is obviously in office, but at the initial start of his term, there was hashtags and demands all over the place. He's not my president, hashtag not my president. What if you magnified that times, 70 million? It's not good. So we will see. Antonio E. says, Robert, why didn't you mention the recent court order against Bookvar's November 1 guidance? She lacks statutory authority. Emailed you the PDF of the order last night. Invalidates votes with ID by November 9th, with no ID by November 9th. Antonio, I didn't see that. I think I may have covered that opinion yesterday. I covered one opinion from the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court that did invalidate a number of votes. I think that was yesterday. I may have the slide. I'm not going to pull it up right now. But yeah, there was an order that was a win for the Donald Trump campaign. I think we talked about it, but it was something that I think was, again, a pretty small bucket of votes. And I'm not sure how consequential that's going to be in terms of reversing the election. Very, very nice super chat from Nicole Partney. She says, thanks for taking your time to help keep us informed. Nicole, it's my pleasure. I love having these conversations. It's a lot of fun, great questions. It gives me the opportunity to sort of dive into new areas and discuss new things and think about new problems from a different perspective. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much for that. Thanks so much for being here. It's really a true pleasure for me. So thank you. We have Cap Baron Goose, who says, surely if the votes, where'd that go? Okay, he says, I'd like to see, Woven Wolf says, I'd like to see an audit for the 2016 election. I would want to see server logs for the tabulation nodes, the switches, and the routers. We have Robert Harrell says, Robert, what can be done about the 1.8 million ghost voters? So I think absolutely, I would like to see the different secretaries of state, the different board of electors, voter registration rolls, I think, should be audited across the whole country. And when's the last time that's happened? We have a lot of changes. I made this analogy previously. Do you send Christmas cards to people? Do you know how difficult it is to just come up with a list of Christmas cards, of addresses, people moving and all sorts of stuff? It's a pain in the butt. Do you think our government is doing a competent job of managing who is whom, where they're at, and their addresses, and whether they're voting properly? I'm going to guess it's not even remotely close to a good list. I'm sure there's huge problems with it. This is one of those things that I think nobody wants to talk about, right? You're never going to have anybody who goes into government and says, our elections are really screwed up. Because if they did, then it would invalidate their claim to power, right? What if you have the next president who came in and said, it's great to be president. By the way that I got elected, kind of illegitimate. Didn't really work. A lot of potential for fraud. We're not so sure if the integrity of this thing's any good, but I thank you for trusting me. I'm going to try to do my best. Right? Nobody's ever going to say that. Everybody gets in and they say we're the best. It's like joining a sports team, right? You join the team, whether you win or lose, we're number one. They all get into government and they all support the government. They all want to support the legitimacy of the government. So the day that you expect, somebody to come out and say, yeah, the very basis for why I got into power is invalid, I do not see that happening, but we will see. All right. Aaron says, great to hear the flip-flops are on the table. Okay. Where is that? Okay, great to hear the flip-flops are on the table. Only people who live in Arizona understand. Great job. Love the law info. Be in touch with R&R Law Group. Have some questions for you guys. Yeah, give us a call. Okay, John Noel says, how many Biden voters wanted to change their vote to Trump after the second debates? Debates should have been finished before any early voting so candidates could be more fully vetted. I agree with that, right? I think this was all strategy, and the Democrats had a pretty good one. They wanted to keep a lot of this stuff in motion so that they could deliver their votes. And I agree. I think the first debate really hurt Trump, probably really turned a lot of people off who didn't want to come in and look at debates 2 or 3. They may have just cast their ballot and said, that guy is not nice. Don't like it. Don't want to see any more of that. That was it. And if that was 1%, 2%, 3% of the people, that may have been enough to swing the election. That single debate may have been an issue for him. Good question, though. We have another one from Zulu. Says, hi, Faith. The Discord slide chat is a brilliant addition. Any chance of getting some previous slides shows in there? Yeah, Zulu. Just, if there's anything specific that you want, let us know. We're going to clean them up a little bit. I have some notes and some personal stuff I put in there. Not really. So we're clean them up and sanitize them, but we'll put them out there. No problem at all. The other thing I thought about doing is sort of, making a different website, a different section, getting this stuff organized. We have hundreds and hundreds of slides. And so it's kind of a tall order for us to go back, but we're going to start trying to be more diligent about it. But we're glad that you like them. By the way, what Zulu is talking about is over on our Discord channel. We have a separate chat room where we're actually going to be posting the slides from the show. So for the foreseeable future, we're going to make a commitment to do that, just so you have them and you can look up this information and download a copy of the slides, use them in your presentations, share them around, send them to your family members or whatever, and tell them, this is some clippings of the actual original material, and then do me a favor and invite them on over to the show. We have Disenchanted Truth with a big super chat. Says, thanks to you and Miss Faith. Thank you, Disenchanted Truth. Disenchanted Truth sent that over and appreciate you being here, along with Nicole, along with Zulu. A lot of super chats, everybody. Thank you so much for those things. Somebody's asking, let me find this. BEG789 says, what about hammer and scorecard? I haven't really looked into that. That was one of those that seemed a little bit like it was not super baked yet. Still a lot of conversation about it, but I haven't seen any real concrete evidence other than speculation. I had spoken to a couple people about, there's a general I looked at. I know there's been a lot of people on Steve Bannon's War Room and all of those areas of, I would say, the internet. There's a lot of that talk going on there, but I haven't taken a deep dive into it because I haven't seen any real credible analyses. But if you want to send me one, I'm happy to look at it, because I think there are some legitimate claims out there. I think that there are some legitimate theories out there, but we're trying to at least pick the ones that I feel are just a little bit more credible. But I haven't looked into that, and I'm happy to do it. We have another question. from Carl says, I'm so impressed with the time and effort you and Faith invest in your show. I don't know how you can do this show and do all your responsibilities. Well, I have Miss Faith. We've got an awesome team. I'm not married and I don't have any kids, and I happen to love this stuff. So I'm a little bit sick in that regard as well. So, and Miss Faith is kind of the same way. We both just work. So we make a good team, and we love to be here. We're having a lot of fun, actually. So thank you, and thanks for that nice comment. David says, why Georgia ballot system? Why did they not use signature verification? How do they audit or trace the individual? This is out of concern for the recounts in Georgia. If that is so, what is the use of recounts? Yeah, this is another issue that I think is interesting. So I was reading somewhere that they can actually make adjustments, which makes sense. They can make adjustments on the signature tabulator, and it does the verification of the signatures as they go into the ballot. So they'll have your signature on file, and then they'll match it as it's coming through. My understanding is they have the authority to actually sort of turn down the sensitivity on that. So they'll only accept a 50% match or a 40% match or a 20% match or whatever it is. So it doesn't need to be 80 or 90%. So in that way, you can just send in a ton of ballots that don't necessarily have to be signed by one particular person. And if the machine doesn't catch them and says that they're verified, you can have a single person filling out a bunch of ballots and just shipping them all in. So I've seen some headlines about that, but I haven't. I don't think anybody's made the connection there. I saw one headline before I hopped on that somebody sent in 8 ballots with 8 different signatures, all under his name, because he got a bunch of them in the mail. So there's certainly weird stuff, but I just haven't seen that. And I haven't seen whether or not that's going to be consequential. But we will see. Kelly Parker says, let's be honest, it was a landslide. Trump lost massively. Trump not says, will Trump try a self-pardon before January 20th? I don't know. It's a good question. Very good question. All right. Hidden Prophet says, hello. I just missed the rundown of the show. Can you give me a quick rundown? Major findings, if any. I wouldn't say that there were any major findings today there, Hidden Prophet, but just hit that rewind button because everything in here has been gold. I don't want you to miss it. All right, we have Marcus Oglesby who says, in Georgia, they have all our signatures from our licenses and they are matched because signatures change. Yeah, Aaron Stevens says Trump lost a few legal battles at state level. That's true. Emma Rose says so much corruption in progressive. That one went away. All right, we've got some other questions before we wrap up. Why am I seeing some of the same comments multiple times, says John T. Probably because some people are, spamming, which is just rude. We don't need any of that rudeness here. We have Dave D, who says, President of the Federal Election Commission, the election is illegitimate. Will it impact the legal fight? I saw that. I saw the FEC person say that. And I didn't read the article, actually. I'd be curious to dive into that. I just saw the headline, so I'll take a look. We have Operation Flag Drop NJ with the super chat. Thank you, Operation. He says, keep up the great info. It helps greatly educate others during our rallies. So many misinformed people out there spreading lies. Yeah, there's a lot of that. A lot of that. It's astounding to me. I poke around the different news sites, and I see this information, and it just seems so opinionated, but they're trying to pass off opinions as facts, and the facts just aren't there yet. There's still a lot of time left in this thing. It may not change. It may not result in a reversal of anything, but it's still part of the process. We still don't need to rush and conclude this thing when the laws don't afford for that. And so the Trump people are just running forward with the laws. I saw a tweet from, I think, Geraldo Rivera today, who's a pretty left-wing guy in my mind. And he said that he had a good conversation with Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump said, I'm a realist. And if this thing doesn't work out, of course, this is all going to get buttoned up. But he does want to continue to challenge it. And, I can understand that, and I can respect that. Donald Trump is a guy who pushes things. He doesn't just accept things, right? He pushes and pushes and pushes almost to the point of breaking systems. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's kind of what you want in order to grow, right? You always talk about breaking out of your comfort zone and doing things that are uncomfortable and doing things that are difficult. That's almost, that's how you sort of get Elon Musk's and Steve Jobs, is by people pushing and pushing and pushing. And Trump's doing that. Now, many people don't like it. It's uncomfortable. It makes him feel bad. But that's just how the system works, and there's still plenty of roadway for him to continue his fights, which may prove to be fruitless. Who knows? But he's still entitled to the process. John Lauer says, I think if misinformation wouldn't be as bad as if the mainstream media were doing their jobs. Yeah, I think they have a pretty clear agenda. It's been pretty obvious to me for a long time. Happy Go Lucky asks, can Trump face possible lawsuit by opening so many toss cases as impending on a lawful election process or impeding on a lawful election process or attempting to influence an outcome? I don't think so. I think all of his claims have been at least worth investigating. They've all had some merit. It's not necessarily illegal to file a lawsuit. I mean, it's not illegal to file a lawsuit. You can file a lawsuit. I think what you'd be going after would be like harassment. Now, the disincentive that courts will impose for filing lawsuits, like how do they get people to stop filing lawsuits against somebody? What if Donald Trump just keeps filing lawsuits and December 14th comes and goes and we're in March 2020 and he's still filing election lawsuit. Well, the courts are just going to say, all right, listen, your case is dismissed. It's already been decided. You have no more standing. This is a moot issue. The country has moved on. And we're going to assess you costs for filing this lawsuit. You're going to pay the court's cost. You're going to pay the defense cost. You're going to pay your own costs. And then he just gets run out of court because of the costs. That's the disincentive. So he can file as many lawsuits as he wants. And I don't think it's going to meet that level of harassment or anything close to that. But it's a good question. Chances an election case gets to SCOTUS. That's from Trump Not. That is already there. I mean, the Bookvar case is at the Supreme Court's door. It's already been sent back down, but now we just saw at the beginning of this program, the NAACP and the ACLU have joined onto the case that is in front of the Supreme Court, or it's like on the door of the Supreme Court, and Donald Trump has joined that campaign or that lawsuit as well. So I think it's almost 100% chance that the Supreme Court is going to weigh in at some point. Whether it changes anything is a different question. And based on the numbers that we saw today, it may not. If it's only 10,000 votes and the remedy only addresses that bucket, then it will not matter in my mind. Kelly Parker says in 2016, Trump won. Now he can't accept he lost. And the mainstream media actually called it for Trump the last time. He can't accept it. We have Sam Blevins who says, thank you for doing this. In my opinion, you are giving the best news coverage of this period. Thank you, Sam. That is such a nice compliment. And, all we're trying to do is just go through some analysis, review the information that's out there, think about it, right? And sometimes we'll do a good job. Sometimes we'll miss the mark, but I appreciate you being here. Okay, we have some other questions. David S. says, can you explain the difference in mail-in voting versus POTUS absentee voting? What one is more secure? True. Go on Judicial Watch. They have it on their site. So yeah, I mean, the difference between mail-in and absentee is, absentee is more like, an example would be like the military, right? They're not in the state, they're absent from the state, but they still have legal resident and domicile there. So, they have a little bit of a different process to bring those ballots in. We saw this in Pennsylvania. One of the big things that they were asking for originally in the original lawsuit was to push the mail-in ballot deadline out to the Uniformed Overseas Act deadline. So in other words, they wanted the mail-in ballot deadline to match the absentee ballot deadline. So it's just two different categories. And the mail-in votes would be for the people who are here that can just sort of go through the regular formal process, vote by mail, get them in by election day, go through the regular routine. Whereas somebody who's an absentee has different requirements. Then they have different, I would also say, credentials. In other words, it needs to be certified that they're actually absentee. Because you don't want somebody who's just, they just moved to Texas. You don't want them voting absentee in the state of Arizona. You want to verify their residency, verify their requirements, make sure it's a legitimate absentee ballot, which is different than a mail-in ballot. But it's a good question. We have Trisha Donaflio. Thank you and Faith for everything. Thanks, Trisha. Appreciate that. Thank you for the super chat. Glad that you are here. Jorgen Johnson is asking about the watermark issue again. So we didn't spend much time on the show talking about it. I think I mentioned that in passing. And the watermark issue is the idea that many of the original ballots, it's the allegation out there that's floating around. I haven't seen much evidence of this, but the allegation is that all of the authentic ballots, the ones that were, legally, lawfully printed, had a watermark on them that you could identify. And the non-legal ballots, the ones that were fraudulent and forged, are going to be missing that watermark. So there was some commentary around the internet that Donald Trump's team had this whole sting operation in place, and they knew that they were going to be copying these ballots and reprinting these ballots and, forging a ton of ballots, and that they were going to get those. They were going to be missing the watermark, and then it was going to invalidate the results. We just haven't seen any of that yet. It's an interesting concept. It'd be a wild thing if something like that happened, but it just seems like that's a little bit speculative at this point. All right. We have FF Film Crew. Using an auto moderator instead of a loyal subscriber is an amateur move that turns people off. From the FF Film Crew. All right, that's good feedback, FF Film Crew. I appreciate that. Currently, we have a couple people who are, Miss Faith is doing some moderating, and we have some other moderators here, but it's, we're trying to figure this thing out, right? I'm an attorney and a business owner, and I'm trying to sort of navigate our way through the YouTube stuff. So I appreciate your positive feedback. We'll try to make improvements. I appreciate it. Somebody said, is Arizona lost? Matt Teixeira says that. It's looking like that, Matt. It's looking like Donald Trump is not going to be able to overcome the outstanding ballots to flip the state. And it's looking like some of his lawsuits here are kind of inconsequential. So even if Kelly Ward, even if the Arizona GOP is successful on their lawsuit, it may not reverse the states. But it's an interesting question. David S says the watermark thing is fake. Machines are done only in the state by their election commissioners. All printing has watermarks. Anything you print has it. Yeah, Blair says that we have Timothy Baker. The deleted posts still show up in the Discord pop-up, which is pretty hilarious. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, Momo's got my back. She says he's a lawyer, not a YouTuber. That's funny. Okay. Never trust a lawyer. Damn it, Jim. I'm just a country doctor. Yeah. Look, we're trying to, to amplify and do a better job here, but I appreciate the feedback. Like I said, Danny King says no Republicans were following the law in those states. Democrat cities weren't causing votes being called illegally counted in Democrat cities. Zulu's here giving glory to the Nightbot. And yeah, FF Film Crew is referring to the Nightbot. So good information. Elias Diaz says, hey, Robert, if your channel keeps growing, will you start having guests on your show or show up on another channels to talk and debate? Yeah, so I'd be interested in going to other channels. Sure, I'd have no problems with that. I currently haven't done any outreach or connected with anybody else who's, other people out there, but I'd be happy to talk with other people. I think there are a lot of people that I follow, I think have a lot of good ideas. In particular, I like Robert Barnes. I think Viva Frey does a good job. There's a couple others out there that do nice jobs, and I'd be more than happy to have a little powwow with them if they would be open to that. Now, in terms of bringing other guests on this show, I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure what that looks like. I've tried that with certain things, and it's sort of, I don't know that it's the right flow for the type of show I want to deliver in terms of the content, but maybe that would be something that we do outside of this sort of, these daily presentations, as it were. All right. We have some other ones. Trisha Donaflio says a debate would be awesome. Yeah, that would be fun. Zulu likes Ma and Faith. We have David. We have Viva Frey. You should contact him and do a show. Has Trump conceded yet? No. All right. We have Joe Gaspar who says, hey, Rob, did you read after Trump's lawyers withdrew today after $750,000 retainer? Yeah, Trump's lawyers withdrew today. Yeah, I did see that. So I actually saw that yesterday, and I think it was Snell and Wilmer. So Snell and Wilmer is a big firm, and he apparently retained them, and they filed a motion to withdraw on his case, which means they are trying. They're getting off of his case, and stuff like that is a little concerning. Joe Gasparo, I think, is commenting right now. I think he is an attorney, and so yeah, it's a little concerning, right? When you're in court and you see an attorney just kind of bail from their client, like after an initial hearing, may indicate that there's not a good relationship there. So I thought the same thing there, Joe. Ashley Lauren says, I think you're doing great as a YouTuber. I haven't seen anything similar from a lawyer's perspective. Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate that. It's nice feedback. Some people think we're doing all right, and that's all that matters to me. So thank you so much, Ashley, for that. All right. Never trust a lawyer says your current format seems to be working. Why fix it? Yeah. I mean, we're having a good time, and I think we got a little bit of a good rhythm going. For those of you who were here, like, I don't know, a year ago or 6-7 months ago, we were trying some different things. And a lot of how this show has matured is literally through these conversations, through people saying, hey, start a Discord. Cool. We started a Discord, start doing this and start doing that. And we do it. And it's been interesting, to see this sort of grow as like community. It's been a weird experience, and I'm grateful for it because I'm having a lot of fun. All right. We have some other comments here. Blair Holder says, is that the only firm that represents him? Are there two others who represent him? Yeah. So Blair, he has a new attorney now. So actually, the new lawsuit that was filed for Kelly Ward and the Arizona GOP, that's with a different law firm. So there are plenty of lawyers here. He's not going to have trouble finding somebody who's going to take the case. It was just interesting that, that big firm bailed out of representing him. That's a big retainer and it's a big case. I don't know what the issue was. It may have been a political thing, like it's a little too much, it's too hot for them. I know that a lot of people who've come out and who are at least even talking about this issue, we saw AOC and some other individuals start this Trump accountability project, and that's concerning, right? And what if Snell and Wilmer doesn't want that kind of heat? What if they don't want to be on that list? So they just decided we're going to let this one go. May have been the situation. Okay. Dr. Moses, a couple more comments. Dr. Moses says, in Wisconsin, where'd that one go? Dr. Moses, is there a chance in the future you could ever cover the John Deere lawsuit pertaining to the release of software for maintenance? Interesting. I have not heard of that one. Release of software for maintenance. That may be something that's like a source code software, a source code issue. In other words, they want to protect their work product so you can't get access to it. I'm happy to take a look at it. I don't know that I'd cover it on this channel, Dr. Moses, but I'll take a look at it. Let's see what else. Elias Diaz, does Faith disagree with any of your takes, or will she get fired for that kind of thing? I think Faith may have to make an appearance on this program at some point because she gets a lot of questions that I can't particularly answer. So we'll leave that to her and we'll see what she wants to do with it. But I would guess that she disagrees with me a lot, right? Who doesn't? Most people in my life do. All right. So Tim McCarl says Trump is going to win. All this will not matter when the 12th Amendment comes in. Yeah. Stress test the validity and the accuracy of the voting systems. That's a great thing. Yeah. Stress test it. Why not? Let's see. Let's make sure that it works. Because if it doesn't work, we've got a lot more elections we need to get through in this country. Let's figure it out right now. Let's make sure we go through this, have this conversation, stop kicking the can down the road, dive in, see what comes out. Then we can all rest easy that we have the president that we should have. All right, everybody. Well, listen, I want to leave it there. It's Friday night. I want to make sure everybody goes and has an awesome weekend. We're going to try to do the same over here. Thank you so much for being a part of the program. A quick reminder, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please do so. And I would love it if you would share the show. A lot of the times these issues can be complicated and a little uncomfortable. And so if you share it with somebody else, you may help them, sort of break some of the stuff down in a little bit of a lower volume. If you turn on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, you've got people who literally want to rile you up and anger you and cause you to be disdainful of your fellow man or woman. We don't want that. We want to have reasonable conversations using our minds, using logic, and sorting through a lot of these issues. And we like having people here. So if you can share the show, maybe we'll have some more people and we'll have even more in-depth, wonderful conversation. So I want to leave it there. And once again, if you know anybody in Arizona who's been charged with a crime, that's what we do. We help good people get back on their feet. We give them safety, clarity, hope for their futures. We do a good job at it. So if you have any Arizona cases, any Arizona referrals, we would be honored if you would send them our way. Other than that, join us on the Discord. We're going to post the slides from today's show and some of the other ones. If you have any special requests, send them our way. Other than that, my friends, have a very wonderful evening, a very nice weekend. Get some rest. I'll see you back here on Monday. It's 4 p.m. California, 5 p.m. Arizona time, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to go all week long. We're going to stay on top of the latest in the elections. And since some of this stuff, we may have some gaps next week. Maybe we'll get back into some more of the criminal justice topics as well. But we'll see, because it's probably going to be another packed and full week. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thanks once again for being here, and I'll see you.